The general balance of Darktide is better than it has ever been, but that doesn't mean that it's perfect. There are still a handful of weapons that have been left to collect dust and need some love, so here are my suggestions to help boost up some of these weapons. The chain axes used to be so bad that they made the Emperor himself weep, but now they're actually not bad. However, they are often overshadowed by the chain swords due to the chain sword's superior horde clear and good single target damage. Chain axes, while viable, don't really fill a niche, and a single change to them can easily give them a niche and reason to run over the chain swords. Grant chain axes an increased dodge limit and dodge distance. It makes absolutely zero sense why the chain axes have a lower dodge than the heavy eviscerators. One-handed weapons should always have higher dodge than two-handed weapons, and the chain axes should receive dodge buffs to reflect this. Specifically, they should be changed to have the dodge profile of the Mark VI heavy sword, which grants it a slight advantage over the chain swords and makes it the more agile of the two chain weapon families, and also helps to make up its lack of horde clear compared to the chain swords. Next up is our beloved Thunderhammers. While no one will disagree about the absolute beast these babies are at killing bosses and elites, they really struggle to deal with larger elite hordes and are a little lacking when it comes to general horde control. These weapons need a bit of help, so here's what I would do. First, entirely remove the self-stun after a special infused attack. There is no reason why we should be stunned after hitting someone with it, and its removal would make it not only so much more effective versus hordes of elites, but it would also just make the weapon handle so much better and be a nice quality of life improvement. Second, the cleave profiles of the hammers should be increased slightly overall. While the hammers should not be able to just freely cleave through a massive pack of maulers or crushers, it should be able to freely cleave through one mauler in the middle of a horde without hitting the cleave cap. The power boost from Slaughterer and Headtaker will allow the hammers to accomplish this, but it shouldn't require a blessing to do something that should just be a base feature of the weapon. And third, buff its stagger power. The recent Crusher buffs made it so that Thunderhammers can no longer knock down Crushers even with a special infused heavy attack, which the weapon should absolutely be able to do. It also feels pretty awful that it can take up to 9 swings for a non-special infused Thunderhammer to knock down a lone Mauler. I'm not saying a single heavy attack should knock down elite units, but it should take less time than it does now. What was once the most overpowered weapon in the game, the Heavy Bolter has unfortunately become a shadow of its former self. It absolutely was too powerful on launch and needed nerfs, but I also don't enjoy seeing it overshadowed by the revolver. There is a slight conundrum though in exactly how we should buff the Bolter. There are many different routes that you can go down when discussing bolter buffs, and searching across Reddit and the Fat Shark forums shows that no one can really agree on one specific way the bolter should be buffed. In my opinion, the bolter should be buffed in accordance with how the weapon functions lore-wise in 40k as a whole. Bolt guns are incredibly powerful, but incredibly difficult to wield and control, which is why you really only see Space Marines using them and not that many normal humans. This is reflected in-game by its long reload time, long draw time, and low accuracy/high recoil, and in order to keep that overall fantasy of the weapon, these aspects of the bolter should be kept and not receive many buffs, if any at all. However, the solution is also not as simple as just buffing its damage. Doing that would just make it overpowered again on Veteran and cause another 2022 Darktide Bolter meta, so the tweaks this weapon needs must fall in between these two restrictions. Keeping them in mind, here is what I would suggest. First, cut down the time it takes to deploy the weapon by roughly 50%. The bolter should have a longer draw time than most weapons, but the current draw time of 2 seconds makes the weapon feel horrible from a gameplay standpoint, and slightly decreasing its draw time would serve both as a wonderful quality of life improvement as well as a minor buff. Most ranged weapons have a draw time of roughly 1/8 of a second, so placing the bolter at a little over a second would be the best balance between making the weapon feel better without sacrificing the bolter fantasy. Second, significantly boost its overall stagger power. Similar to the Thunderhammers, the bolt gun can no longer hard stagger crushers or maulers and needs a stagger boost so that it can. Third, reduce the amount of shots required to open up bulwark shields by 1 so that bulwarks no longer hard stop bolters from functioning. And finally, entirely overhaul the base breakpoints of the bolter. The bolter's power fantasy comes from it being an incredibly powerful weapon that can get people with a single shot, and the bolter needs its base breakpoints overhauled in order to reflect that. To put it in perspective, here are how many body shots it takes for the bolter to kill various enemies in the game in Damnation, some of which are egregiously bad. These breakpoints should be altered so that the bolter can live its 40k fantasy, such as allowing the bolter to one-shot body shot every trash unit in the game, and reducing the number of Poxhound body shots required down to no more than 2. The breakpoints versus elites and heavily armored units should also be improved so that the bolter can have an easier time functioning in high-intensity games, but you must once again be careful increasing the breakpoints of certain types of damage with the bolter. Increasing the damage versus infested and carapace enemies is no problem and should be done quite heavily, but the same cannot be said for flak armor nor unyielding, due to how many enemies are protected by the former and bosses all using the latter. I don't have a perfect mathematical answer on how to balance the bolter in regards to flak armor, but an easy and effective way to buff it in the meantime is by heavily increasing its infested and carapace armor damage while only slightly increasing its unyielding damage to ensure it doesn't become a boss melter. The bolter should be an incredibly powerful anti-armor tool, but should not trivialize absolutely everything the game throws at you, and these changes best reflect this and still leave the bolter with some weaknesses, including sniping, horde clearing, and monster killing. And lastly, Zealot's Heavy Flamer. I will say that I am not surprised Fury of the Faithful got the nerf that it did, as it didn't seem intended on launch, but nerfing Fury without reverting the nerfs done on the Flamer absolutely destroys any semblance of armor clearing it had. The Flamer needs inherent armor penetration in order for it to function. It doesn't have to be much, as Flamers are generally supposed to be general fodder cleaners rather than elite killers, but it needs a boost of some kind. I mean, just look at this. Of course, there are more weapons that need tweaks than just these, but this small list is a great start to make the balance of Darktide the best that it can be. What do you think, though? What weapons do you think need a buff? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.